Jessica Lynn Kaler was born on May 8, 1982 in Austin, Texas. She lived there with her parents and two brothers until the family later moved to a small town called Pflugerville. Jessica was warm, friendly, and easy to get along with. Making friends came naturally to her. But she wasn't just social, she was also incredibly driven. Even in high school, she had a clear goal. She wanted to be a teacher. To make that dream a reality, she enrolled at Texas State University. She earned her bachelor's degree in science. But she didn't stop there. Jessica decided to continue her education and work toward a master's degree. At the same time, she took a job as a teaching assistant at an elementary school. On top of that, she worked part-time at a grocery store. With student loans to pay off and bills stacking up, she had no choice but to juggle multiple jobs. But even with her packed schedule, she never lost her positive spirit. Jessica believed that all the hard work would eventually pay off. She was determined to make it happen. In September 2009, at 27 years old, Jessica was still balancing her studies with two jobs. She was hopeful that soon she'd land a full-time teaching position at her school and finally focus on the career she had always dreamt of. On September 7th, Jessica had the day off, so she spent it with her friends and her cousin Melanie. They started the day by hanging out at the pool, then went out for dinner. Later, they stopped by a bar, played some pool. When the night wrapped up, Jessica took on the role of designated driver, making sure everyone got home safely. Melanie was the last one she dropped off. By then, it was almost 1:30 in the morning. She offered Jessica to stay the night, but Jessica declined. She had an early shift at the grocery store and needed to stop by a 24-hour store to grab some food for her dogs. So after saying goodbye to her cousin, she headed out. A few hours later, as morning approached, Melanie got a call from one of Jessica's co-workers. She told her that Jessica hadn't shown up for her shift, which was pretty strange because Jessica had never skipped work without a good reason. Plus, by that time, she had been promoted to store manager, which meant even more responsibility. Melanie started to worry and called a few friends, but none of them had heard from Jessica that morning. Next, she reached out to her brother, John. He and Jessica shared an apartment, but he told her he hadn't seen her either. John worked as a police officer and had started his shift at 5:30 a.m. He hadn't noticed whether Jessica had come home during the night and hadn't checked her room before leaving for work. Concerned, he immediately drove back home, but Jessica wasn't there. In fact, it didn't even look like she had returned the night before. Her dogs were acting strangely, almost as if they hadn't been fed in a while. That set off alarms. Something was definitely wrong. Without wasting any time, John reached out to his colleagues at the police department, asking them to track Jessica's phone. Following the signal, police traced it to a restaurant not far from her home. Melanie and her boyfriend rushed to the location, and it didn't take long for them to spot Jessica's car in the parking lot. But as soon as they got closer and opened the door, they were met with a horrifying sight. Jessica was in the driver's seat, completely unresponsive. Her body was covered in visible sunburns, and inside the car, it was unbearably hot. Melanie's boyfriend called the police, who dispatched officers and an ambulance to the scene. Paramedics confirmed that Jessica was dead, and her body was sent for further examination. But one thing was already clear. It looked like she'd been attacked. Meanwhile, investigators began examining Jessica's car, and one of the first things they noticed was that the driver's seat was pushed way too far back. Considering the injuries on her body, detectives suspected she might have been attacked right there in the car. They also discovered that her keys, wallet, and credit cards were missing. On the back seat, they found a bag of dog food, suggesting that Jessica had been there since the night before. After all, she had planned to stop at the store right after dropping off her cousin. After thoroughly searching the car, detectives went into the restaurant near the parking lot where Jessica's car had been found. And that's when things took a shocking turn. One of the restaurant employees told investigators that when she arrived at work early that morning, she noticed Jessica's car. But at that time, Jessica was still alive. According to the witness, Jessica was sitting inside her car completely undressed and acting strangely, almost as if she was under the influence. Despite how bizarre the scene was, the employee didn't think much of it and went inside to start her shift. A little while later, she stepped outside again. This time, Jessica was sitting next to her car. She had put her clothes back on but was still behaving oddly, just sitting there, running her hands through her hair. The third time the employee went outside, Jessica was back in her car, talking to herself and making strange hand gestures. Police found several more witnesses who had seen Jessica alive that morning, But despite her unusual behavior, not a single person called for help or even checked to see if she was okay. After speaking with the witnesses, detectives went back to Melanie and asked if Jessica could have been under the influence of alcohol or something stronger. But her cousin was adamant Jessica had been completely sober that night. She was the designated driver, responsible for getting everyone home safely, and she had work in the morning. As for drugs, Melanie insisted that Jessica had never touched them in her life. None of it made sense to investigators, but soon they stumbled upon a possible explanation for what had happened. Medical examiners found signs of strangulation on Jessica's body, marks left by both hands and some kind of material, possibly a rope or a belt. She was also covered in bruises and scratches, and she had been sexually assaulted. According to experts, the trauma she endured could have caused a brain injury, which was only made worse by the fact that she had spent hours sitting inside a hot car under the scorching sun. This might explain her strange behavior, why she seemed disoriented and never called for help. Most likely, Jessica was so out of it that she didn't even realize what was happening to her. And in the end, she succumbed to her injuries. Toxicology reports backed up what her cousin had already said. There was no alcohol or drugs in her system. So, if just one of the witnesses had called for medical help, doctors might have had a chance to save Jessica. But now it was too late, and detectives had to figure out who was responsible for her death. They focused on finding CCTV footage, but there were no cameras near the parking lot where Jessica had been found. Still, they figured out one thing. If she had bought dog food in the middle of the night, she had probably stopped at the 24-hour Walmart just across the street. Detectives obtained the store's security footage, and there she was, Jessica pulling into the parking lot and walking inside. She was alone and seemed completely fine. There were no signs that anything was wrong. She went straight to the pet food aisle, grabbed a large bag and headed to the checkout. Everything looked normal, but then as she walked out of the store, detectives noticed something interesting. Just a few seconds later, a man followed her outside. Reviewing more footage, detectives saw that the man had arrived at Walmart just minutes before Jessica. He parked at the far end of the lot and walked inside, but instead of going into the store, he headed straight to the restroom and then walked back out. Checking the entrance camera, detectives saw him walking directly behind Jessica, and he was definitely in a hurry. But then they hit a problem. Jessica's car was parked right behind a large tree, completely blocking the view from the cameras. Still, the footage was enough to track the man's movements. He walked toward Jessica's car, disappearing behind the tree, and never came back out. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car pulled out of the parking lot. Another camera later captured it arriving at the restaurant parking lot where she would be found the next morning. A little while later, someone stepped out of Jessica's car. This person walked across the lot, heading straight for Walmart's parking area, where he got in the same vehicle the suspicious man had arrived in earlier. At this point, detectives were almost certain this person was directly involved in Jessica's murder. But there was one problem. The surveillance footage was too poor to clearly identify him or his vehicle. Still, detectives weren't out of options. Since Jessica's credit cards were missing, they checked her accounts for any recent activity. And that's when they found a lead. One of her cards had been used at a gas station about 20 minutes after her car was left in the restaurant parking lot. Detectives pulled surveillance footage from the gas station and immediately spotted the red pickup truck their suspect had been driving. And when they checked the camera near the register, their suspicions were confirmed. It was the same man. Now they had proof that this person had Jessica's credit card, and that only made him look even more guilty. They released footage of the suspect and his vehicle to the news, asking the public for any information about this man. Meanwhile, detectives kept searching for more evidence, but they couldn't find any other leads. Days passed without any major breakthroughs, until they got a call from a woman named Leslie. She told them that the man in the footage looked a lot like her fiancé's best friend, 29-year-old Crispin Harmel. But that wasn't all. According to Leslie, Crispin was supposed to stop by that evening to pay back the money he owed, but he never showed up. Later, when she saw the news report about Jessica's murder, she immediately recognized him in the surveillance footage. She couldn't believe he might be involved in something so horrific, but she still knew the right thing to do was call the police. Detectives began digging into Crispin's background and quickly uncovered an interesting detail. Just weeks before Jessica's murder, a patrol officer had pulled him over for driving with an expired license. When investigators reviewed the officer's body camera footage, they confirmed that Crispin closely resembled their suspect. Even more telling, he was wearing the exact same baseball cap as the man in the surveillance footage. 5 days after Jessica's murder, police went to Crispin's home. Right away, they noticed his pickup truck. It was the same model as the one caught on camera, but something was off. It looked like Crispin had made some cosmetic changes. Chrome details that had been visible in the footage were now painted over in black. When detectives knocked on his door, Crispin surprised them right away. Without hesitation, he admitted that he had met with Jessica that night. According to him, they connected through an adult website and had arranged to meet for a no-strings-attached hookup. Crispin claimed they met in the Walmart parking lot, where he got into Jessica's car. According to him, she then drove them to a park, where they had consensual sex, before she dropped him back off at Walmart. Before he left, they sat in her car and talked for a while. He told her he was struggling financially and, according to his version of events, Jessica gave him her credit card so he could pay for gas. Then they said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. The next day, when he saw news reports about Jessica's murder, Crispin said he panicked. Afraid he would be accused, he threw away the credit card and repainted parts of his truck. Even though Crispin told this story with confidence, detectives knew it was nothing but a lie. It looked like a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. The surveillance footage alone was enough to tear his version apart. He claimed they had arranged to meet in the Walmart parking lot, yet he never approached Jessica until after she returned to her car. Then, he said she had driven him back after their supposed encounter. The cameras told a different story. They clearly showed him walking back to his own truck alone. Jessica's car never moved from the parking lot until the next morning, and no one else had approached it. Detectives seized Crispin's phone and computer, along with Jessica's devices. As they suspected, there was no trace of any communication between them. No messages, no calls, nothing. In fact, Jessica had never even visited the adult website Crispin claimed they had used to arrange the meeting. But when investigators dug through Crispin's computer, they found something interesting. Just hours after police discovered Jessica's body, he had searched for and read multiple news articles about her murder. Jessica's friends and family didn't believe his story either. According to them, she wasn't the kind of person who would go looking for a one-night stand, let alone meet a total stranger in a parking lot in the middle of the night. Just wasn't who she was. On top of that, she had already told her friends she needed to get some sleep before her morning shift and that she still had to feed her dogs. There was no way she would have gone out for some secret late-night date. Investigators believed Crispin was doing everything he could to shift the blame, but with so much evidence stacked against him, there was no way he could come up with a believable excuse. Based on the surveillance footage, detectives pieced together what they believed really happened. Crispin likely spotted Jessica inside Walmart and targeted her. He followed her to her car, got in, and used threats to keep her from screaming or fighting back. From there, he may have forced her to drive to a nearby park, where he assaulted her before returning to the parking lot near Walmart, closer to his own truck. Before leaving, he strangled her and stole her wallet and credit cards. When police confronted Crispin with this version of events, he stopped answering questions and asked for a lawyer. Despite the strong evidence against Crispin, investigators faced a serious challenge, one that could put the entire case at risk. The fact that Jessica had remained alive for several hours after the attack created a major legal hurdle. The problem was that medical experts couldn't say with absolute certainty why this had happened. Cases like hers were so rare that medical science simply hadn't studied them in enough depth. As we know, the official cause of death was listed as strangulation. But until that point, there had never been a single documented case of someone being strangled, surviving for hours while walking and talking, and then dying later as a direct result of this attack. Because multiple witnesses had seen Jessica alive, the prosecutor wasn't confident that a jury would return a guilty verdict. The only thing that could truly seal the case was a confession, but Crispin refused to admit to anything. Detectives found themselves in an incredibly difficult situation. They were certain that Crispin was responsible for Jessica's murder. No one else could have physically committed the crime, but because she had remained alive until the morning, there was a real risk that the case would fall apart in court. Hoping to strengthen their case, investigators searched Jessica's car for any additional evidence, but they came up empty. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could directly tie Crispin to the crime scene. Still, prosecutors found a temporary solution. They charged him with evidence tampering in connection with Jessica's case. As we know, Crispin had admitted to throwing away her credit card and repainting his truck. Both clear attempts to cover his tracks. Since they had his own words as proof, they at least had enough to hold him accountable for some crime while they continued working to build a stronger case. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison for evidence tampering. But detectives had no intention of giving up. They were determined to get full justice for Jessica, and to do that, they needed solid scientific proof directly linking Crispin to her murder. For years, they kept searching without any progress. But then, in 2013, they came across a scientific article that changed everything. This article described cases where strangulation didn't immediately result in death, as it typically would. Instead, it triggered something known as delayed death syndrome, a condition where victims suffer brain damage that causes confusion, disorientation, and an inability to seek help. Everything in the article perfectly matched Jessica's behavior after the attack. It also supported the initial medical examiner's conclusion that she had likely suffered a brain injury, which left her unaware of her condition until it was too late. Detectives immediately contacted the author of this article and started building a murder case against Crispin, this time backed by cutting-edge medical science. In May 2014, Crispin was officially arrested for murder, but he continued to insist on his innocence. During the trial, his defense attorney focused on one key point. There was no DNA evidence linking Crispin to the crime. The prosecution had argued that Jessica had fought back during the attack and likely scratched her attacker, which should have left traces of DNA under her fingernails. However, forensic experts for the prosecution pointed out a crucial factor. Jessica had spent hours inside her car, trapped in extreme heat. At such high temperatures, DNA degrades rapidly, and by the time her body was examined, any genetic material under her nails would have already broken down beyond the point of recovery. In addition to the forensic evidence, prosecutors relied heavily on the overwhelming amount of surveillance footage, which clearly pointed to Crispin's guilt. But then something unexpected happened. Crispin's lawyer questioned the accuracy of the video timestamps used by the prosecution. See, when investigators first got the footage straight from the security cameras, there were no timestamps on it. Since the exact timing of events was crucial to the case, prosecutors used specialized software to add them later. And that single detail gave the defense an opening to cast doubt on the evidence. Crispin's attorney argued that this was a serious violation, because he had never been given copies of the surveillance footage with the added timestamps. In the end, the judge sided with the defense and was forced to declare a mistrial. Just like that, Crispin once again escaped conviction, all because of a technicality. However, he remained in prison, continuing to serve his 10-year sentence for evidence tampering. Meanwhile, prosecutors immediately began preparing for a new trial. Over the next few years, Crispin's legal team fought hard to prevent him from being retried, arguing that another trial would violate his rights. But in the end, a higher court ruled in favor of the prosecution, clearing the way for justice to finally be served. The new trial began in 2018, and this time, the prosecution made sure to cover every detail, leaving no room for the defense to exploit any technicalities. In the end, they succeeded in convincing the jury of Crispin's guilt, and he was finally convicted of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors had chosen not to pursue the death penalty, fearing it might weaken their chances of securing a guilty verdict. They knew the delayed death syndrome argument could still plant doubts in the jurors' minds, and in death penalty cases, a conviction requires absolute certainty. A few years later, Crispin tried to appeal his sentence, but his request was denied. As a result, he remains behind bars with almost no chance of ever walking free. Jessica's family thanked investigators and prosecutors for their relentless pursuit of justice, even though it took 9 long years to reach a verdict. However, they also admitted that before the sentencing, they had hoped it might bring them some relief and closure. But in reality, no punishment for Crispin could ever truly ease their pain. 28-year-old Annie Nino Hindacha was born in Sweden to Vinod and Nilam. Her family, originally from Uganda, had been compelled to leave in the early 1970s when Ugandan President Idi Amin issued a 90-day ultimatum for all South Asians to depart. The family was granted residency in Sweden and established themselves in Maristad before Annie's birth. Annie had 2 siblings, a sister named Amy and a brother, Anish. Her father, Vinod, prospered in Sweden by starting a successful business, and the family became well-established. Intelligent, ambitious, and confident, Vinod said he knew he spoiled her, but he couldn't help himself. Annie's cousin said she was like the leader of the pack and the glue of the family. After graduating from university, Annie moved to Stockholm to work in marketing for the mobile phone maker Ericsson. As she reached her mid-20s, she was looking to settle down and hoping to find a husband. She adored her sister's children and was keen to start a family of her own. She regularly flew to London and would spend her time shopping, socializing, and making contacts. It wouldn't be long before she met 30-year-old Sri Andawani from Bristol. He was well-respected and successful, working in his family's nursing home business, and was already a millionaire before the age of 30. One of Annie's aunts had seen him around and thought the match between he and her niece would be perfect. She arranged for the pair to meet at a coffee shop. Annie's sister said that although Annie didn't seem to like him straight away, after the second date, she had warmed to him. Shireen had similar lives, with parents also fleeing Uganda for the same reason Annie's had. People had differing opinions. Of some said they found him to be quite arrogant, someone that loved to show off his wealth. But others said that beneath all that, he was actually very kind and generous. Annie's sister said that Annie would always talk about how much she liked Shrine's sense of humor and the way he made her feel protected. As the couple entered into a long-distance relationship, taking it in turns to visit each other, they began finding things tough. Friends said they were both very headstrong and often argued, presumably about the distance. At one point, Annie called time on the relationship, but they eventually patched things up with Annie giving up her job in Stockholm and moving into an apartment in Luton so that the couple could be closer. Her parents soon flew over to meet Shirin's family. Vinod recalled feeling a bit intimidated by the wealth of the Dewani family, but said they were very welcoming and warm. Vinod said that everyone had really liked Srihan. He was polite, educated, and driven, and the couple seemed to have a great connection. Annie told her dad that Srihan did not believe in sex before marriage, something Vinod said showed dedication to his religion and Annie as his future wife. After the visit was and both parents had approved of the couple and the families, Annie and Sri and May plans to marry. In October 2010, 100 of guests gathered just outside of Mumbai to celebrate the 3-day wedding of Sri and Dewani and Ani Hindocha. It was a truly exquisite event, and Ani had spent 3 months in India planning it. Vinod said that although his family were not wealthy like the Dewanis, he had been saving for his children's wedding since they were born and wanted to give Annie everything she had dreamed of. As picture-perfect as the wedding had seemed, some of Annie's close friends recalled feeling weird about it, with one of her friends saying it didn't feel like Annie was very present and someone else referring to the wedding as a strange experience that didn't feel like the friends she knew. The 3-day event would soon be over, and Shreel and Ani Dewani would be heading off for their honeymoon. 3 weeks after their gorgeous wedding, the couple headed to South Africa on their 10-day honeymoon. Annie had no idea where they were going, and the whole thing had been planned by Shriyan. He had told people he chose South Africa because it was an S for Shriyan and an A for Annie. After a busy and eventful few days, they arrived at Cape Town International Airport from Johannesburg on Friday, November 12th. Sheehan was looking to flag down a taxi. Instead of using the hotel's dedicated car service, he opted for the local shuttle service at a cheaper rate. A driver named Zola Tongo pulled over in a Volkswagen minivan, and the couple began the 20-minute drive to their lavish waterfront hotel called Cape Grace. Before Zola dropped the Dwanis at their hotel, Sriyan asked Tongo to wait for him so he could make plans for him to pick them up the following night for dinner. Shreem said he wanted Tongo to show the couple around Cape Town as well, and Tongo agreed to act almost as an unofficial tour guide for the pair. The following day, before the couple were picked up by Tongo, they spent time at the bar having some drinks and taking pictures. Shriyan had reserved a table at 96 Winery Road, one of the most acclaimed restaurants in the area. Tongo picked the couple up at about 7:30 p.m. But on the way to the restaurant, Sriyan and Annie decided they weren't in the mood for a big meal and wanted something lighter. Tongo said he knew the right area and would take them there. He pulled off the highway just before 9 p.m. and eventually dropped them off at the Surfside restaurant in Strand. They stayed for only a short time. Tongo picked them up at around 10:30 p.m. Shriyan said Annie was keen to see the raw and real culture of some parts of South Africa, especially the nightlife of the townships. He said she insisted that Tongo drive around and show them what it was like. The three drove into the township of Ngugulito. To this day, Ngugulito has an extremely high crime rate, and people that live there say it's rare to ever leave your homes after dark, let alone have tourists that visit. Over 700 people were murdered in Ngugulito between 2,052,010, which amounts to one murder every 2.5 days for 5 consecutive years. The police said they themselves wouldn't even travel into some of the townships without being in a big group. At 10:45, Tongo stopped the car at an intersection, and out of nowhere, 2 men rushed the vehicle and started banging on the windows holding guns. The men got into the car, eventually forcing Tongo out. They began driving around for almost an hour with the couple holding each other in the back seat. terrified. They took Xian's watch and phone and Annie's jewelry. Eventually, the car stopped. The man who was driving said they didn't want to hurt the couple and they would let them go, but separately. Sherwin was then thrown out onto the road, and the gun-wielding men sped off into the night with a hysterical Annie in the back seat. At 10:30 p.m., a man opened his door to find Sheeran standing in front of him, crying and asking if there was anywhere near he could report a carjacking. He had been stumbling up and down the road, knocking on doors, moving from one home to the next in the dark. The man said he asked him for details, but Sheeran was hazy and too distraught to remember a lot. The police arrived shortly after and took Shreem back to the location it had happened in, driving around trying to piece everything together. They also quickly located the taxi driver Zola Tongo, who had reported the carjacking as well, and everyone headed back to the Cape Grace Hotel together. The hotel manager spoke with both Shryan and Tongo. He commented how odd it was to staying in a hotel as glamorous as the Cape Grace on your honeymoon and be wanting to travel through dangerous townships like Guadalajara in the middle of the night. Shortly after, Vinod got a call off Praksh Dewane back in Bristol, saying that Annie had been kidnapped. Vinod was confident they could pay the kidnappers whatever they wanted and save his daughter. After this, he would then answer the phone again, this time to Sriyan, telling him how sorry he was unable to protect Annie. Vinod booked the first flight out. Early the following morning, police received a call from a resident living in a neighborhood in Kailicha, about a 20-minute drive from Gugula 2. They reported that a gray Volkswagen minivan had been sitting alongside the road all night. At 8 a.m., the police got to the vehicle. Lying across the back seat was the body of Annie Doheny. She had been shot once at point-blank range in the neck and the bullet was lodged in the seat. She had some bruises on her body and the coroner confirmed that she would have bled to death. Tragically, her father would hear of this as he was boarding his connecting flight from Amsterdam. He said he spent the journey feeling totally numb. He met Shreya the following day at the Cape Grace Hotel. One of the officers that arrived at the scene that morning said he knew right away this would not be a straightforward case. Something felt strange and didn't sit right with him. He said that Tongo would have known the area well enough to know the dangers at least, and probably enough that he would have most likely been able to identify the two men. You wouldn't drive tourists around there during the day, let alone at night. So why did you? The officers asked. She insisted, Tongo said. But Annie's sister said she simply didn't believe Annie would have wanted to do that, and was well aware of the potential dangers they could face. The officer questioning Tongo wondered why the men let both he and Shreem leave alive and unharmed, knowing they would likely go straight to the police and identify them. And then they proceed with Annie by herself and she gets shot. That, to me, just doesn't gel, he recalled. The murder of Annie Duane was shocking, and the residents of Cape Town and South Africa as a whole said despite the crime rates, this was still an appalling and awful case by anyone's standards. Annie's story took up vast amounts of space in the news and had immense media coverage from all over the world. Authorities threw a huge amount of time and resources at the case, keen to solve something that had become such big news so quickly. Zola Tongo was initially very helpful with police and was keen to answer their questions. The case was moving at a rapid pace, and the two men that had hijacked the vehicle were quickly located. Prince found in and on the car took police straight to a man named Galal Mangini. He'd been arrested several years earlier and his prints had remained on file. He was apprehended in his home, and while police were searching around, they found a phone that had been wedged in between the mattress and the bed frame. When they asked who this belonged to, Mangini said it belonged to the taxi driver Zola Tongo. Menjel confessed to his involvement almost immediately. He told police that the third man they were looking for was 26-year-old Zwamadola Quabe. Quab was found 2 days later, and by this time, Sheeran had already flown back to the UK. While Quab was being questioned, he threw a third and new name into the mix, Mondom Balambo, a receptionist at another hotel. As Quab was leaving one of his interviews, Mond was being brought in. As he passed him, Quabe asked police if he could speak to him, but that he would say it in English. He said, "Tell them everything." Police would soon make another announcement. The 31-year-old taxi driver who had been so helpful and forthcoming with detectives had also been arrested in connection with the murder of Annie Duane. Zola Tongo's friends said it came as a total shock to them. He had no criminal record and had always been so responsible and law-abiding. They said something like this was hard to believe. But Shriyan told a reporter he had actually suspected that Tongo was involved. So the arrest didn't come as a complete shock. As the media firestorm raged on, Annie was finally laid to rest. 1,500 people would gather in a concert hall in London for Annie's memorial service, and her ashes would later be scattered in her favorite area of the Vänern Lake, which was close to her hometown in Sweden. The police's investigation continued, and to their surprise, Zola Tonga would make a claim so strong and startling that it would turn the investigation completely on its head. Tonga was escorted into the Winberg Magistrates Court, his face hidden by a sheet. It had been announced that he was likely to enter a plea bargain and receive a more lenient sentence in exchange for more information about the case. Tonga claimed that this was no random attack, and he wanted to tell the whole truth about what had really happened that night. He alleged that it had in fact been Annie's husband, Shrian, that had orchestrated the entire crime and put together the plan to kill his new bride. He said that the day he picked Shrian and Annie up from the airport, Shrian hung back to talk to him while Annie went inside. According to the CCTV, Tongo said to Shrian that he was not the man for the job, but that he knew someone that could facilitate his request. He said that Shrian offered R15,000, the equivalent of less than £1,000 at the time, to carry out the alleged hit. The police said that Tongo's claims appeared to be backed up by the copious amounts of CCTV footage, but others said that the CCTV backed up Shri inside the story and version of events too. Tangio said that after he drove away, he headed to the hotel that Mond worked at, and it was here that Mond contacted Quab, and the plan was set in motion. Phone records showed Mond repeatedly trying to get hold of Quab and Tongo. The CCTV in the hotel Mond worked at had audio as well, and during one of the calls he said, "It's that thing we were talking about. It must happen today." Tongo said that he had met Shrihan just before noon on the day of the murder so that Shrihan could get his money converted. Tongo drove him to the place with a lower conversion rate than the hotel. Vinod said he rang to get hold of Annie, but Shrihan answered the phone and said he was in fact at the market changing some money over. Vinod thought nothing of it and just asked that she call him back later. Tongo professed that Shrihan took him aside outside the Surfside restaurant on the night of the murder and wanted to know if he had arranged for the guys. Tongo confirmed that everything had been arranged. As they began to drive into Gugler 2, Tongo said that he and Shrihan exchanged several text messages. It was alleged that Shrihan had told him the cash was in an envelope in a pouch behind the front seat. Police said that the texts and calls between the pair were corroborated by cell phone data analysis, but because Shrihan's phone was never, it was a media frenzy, and nobody knew what to think. If this plea deal was to go ahead, it meant that Annie's family had to be consulted, and they were faced with a difficult and gut-wrenching decision. But her family all ultimately agreed for Tongo to accept it, and as confused and devastated as they were, they said they just wanted the truth about what had happened to Annie. The amount of public attention that Annie's case was getting was even more clear to see when the court cases started. The story was huge and getting more surreal by the day. Shrihan and his family vehemently denied all the claims, saying it was completely ridiculous and lacked any evidence at all. Shrihan's lawyers, two of the most powerful and successful in the country, said that it just seemed incomprehensible that he would have asked the first person he met in Cape Town to carry out a hit on his wife, and it just made no sense for the state to be suggesting it. They said the evidence didn't actually prove anything. A little over a month after Annie had been killed, Zola Tongo was jailed for 18 years after making a plea agreement. Mond and Quabe soon followed suit and would both start pointing the finger at Sri and Duani too. Kwame would also be offered a reduced sentence, which he would accept in exchange for a guilty plea and his promise of a testimony against Shrihan and any other criminal proceedings related to the crime. He was subsequently jailed for 25 years. Menjini was not offered any kind of deal, and he would later plead not guilty in court. Authorities said there was no point in offering him a plea deal because he couldn't have taken them any further with the case than anyone else involved. Mangini had his trial pushed back as he underwent surgery for a brain tumor, but he was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Lawyers for both Quabe and Menjel said their clients had been abused, even tortured by the police because authorities were so pressured to solve such a high-profile case. The police denied all the allegations. Hotel receptionist Mond admitted to his involvement, but he was granted full immunity from prosecution in exchange for his promise of a truthful testimony against Shrihan, something which left many shocked, considering he had been the one to make the call to Kwabi and arrange the hit. Monday said, "I want to state it here that Mr. Duani is lying. He knows everything from the beginning to the end." Sherwin would soon find himself arrested in Bristol on suspicion of conspiring to murder Annie, and South African authorities were now fighting to extradite him. But despite what the men were saying, there still didn't appear to be any motive. People said he wouldn't have gained anything from Annie's death financially as there was no life insurance policy. And by all accounts, there didn't appear to be any issues within the couple's relationship. But an interview with the Sun newspaper was later published, which gave the South African police a potential motive if Sheehan was involved. Anonymous emails have been sent to the Sun suggesting that Sheehan was gay, and people alleged that he had been paying a male prostitute for sex. His name was Leopold Leeser and was known to his clients as the German Master. Leopold told the Sun that Shireen had confided, "I just married the girl of my dreams," he said. "Why would I want to kill her?" But police began speculating that perhaps Annie had found out during the honeymoon that Sheehan was keeping this potential secret about his sexuality. And this is what sparked the later events. One of the leading investigators said it had become the most publicized, most in-your-face case he'd seen in his 36 years on the job. Although Vinod fiercely fought back against anyone that suggested his son-in-law may have been involved, he later revealed that over time, things had begun to eat away at him more and more. "I have spoken with my son-in-law, and there are far more questions than answers," he said. Many South African reporters and journalists agreed and said that although the crime rates in the area was high, something just didn't add up. One reporter said that this was not a typical crime, far from it, and a big red flag had been that the car was just left there rather than being burnt or sold on. Vinod said Sryan would often give varying accounts of what happened that night, different times and different orders of events. One example being that Sryan had told authorities Kwabe and Menjini had taken all of Annie's jewelry. But after Annie was found, he phoned an officer to ask him to check his SIM in the back seat of the car. He said he would find Annie's £25,000 engagement ring in there, and sure enough, there it was. When he was asked why this wasn't in his original statement, Shreem said he was in shock at the time, and now he wanted to amend the statement he had made. Sheeran had also thrown a pizza party the night before Annie's funeral, which Vinod said he found to be highly inappropriate and disrespectful. Annie's family recalled that Sheeran was furious that they had gathered to say goodbye to Annie before she was laid to rest, and was very rough with her body when trying to dress her, something Annie's cousin said made her extremely uncomfortable. Her cousin also said the letters and flowers the family had left with Annie's body ended up on the floor when Sheehan grabbed them and threw them down. Sheehan later apologized to the family and admitted he shouldn't have acted in that way. The Dewarney family hired Max Clifford to handle the overwhelming amount of attention from the press. Max Clifford was a well-known London press agent who had represented celebrities such as Muhammad Ali, Marvin Gaye, and Marlon Brando. Once well-respected and sought after in the world of PR, he had a huge fall from grace in 2014. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison after being found of a string of indecent assaults against young girls. He would later die in prison after suffering a heart attack. While he was handling Sryan's case, Sryan's brother, Priyen, demanded that Annie's family sign an agreement that said they would not say anything to the media without consulting Max Clifford first. Vinod refused. Sheeran was sent to the Priory Hospital in Bristol and was said to be suffering from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Max Clifford said that Sheehan had lost 28 pounds since his wife's death and was getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Shortly after, he was detained under the Mental Health Act. Due to his mental health issues, Sheehan's extradition hearings were pushed back and put off for a long time, but they finally began at Belmarsh Magistrates Court in London. Annie's uncle said, "We don't understand why Shryan doesn't simply get on a plane and go and tell his side of the story." Annie's brother said, "We are just focusing on this case at the moment, and it is hard to even start making the grieving process final yet because there are so many questions we need answers to." The Home Secretary and later Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Theresa May, signed an order for Shryan to be extradited to South Africa. Shryan entered a plea of not guilty to all 5 charges brought against him, and the trial would be set. On the first day of his trial, the court heard more about his sexuality. And in a written statement read out by his lawyers, Sheeran said that despite his previous denials, he was bisexual. Annie's family spoke of their disappointment of not knowing this about him and said they were prepared to sue him for not being honest with them. A list of admissions released by the courts also showed that Shryan had been looking at gay porn and dating websites on the honeymoon and just hours after Annie's body was found. The prosecution said that this, combined with the statements from the German master Leopold and several others, clearly showed that Shryan was conflicted and desperate to hide a big part of his life. They argued that this wasn't about his sexuality per se. Rather, it was about the conversations in which he had disclosed his more witnesses came forward on behalf of the prosecution and said that Shireen and Annie's relationship, no matter how perfect it might have looked, was far from it. Annie's cousin recalled that Annie had spoken to her just after the wedding and expressed her worry about whether a big mistake had been made in marrying him. Annie sent numerous text messages to her cousin saying things like, "Hate him and fighting a lot with Tryon, told him I'm going home. Wish I had never got engaged." A particularly sad one read, "Crying has become my new hobby." Just one day into the honeymoon, Annie sent another message saying, "Really trying. He's a really good guy in all ways, but I don't feel happy with him at all." Others said any disagreements the pair had were totally normal and very trivial, and it's possible the stress of planning such a big wedding had left Annie tired and feeling more emotional. The state star witness was Zola Tongo, and police and prosecution said that the entire case rested on his testimony. He was the only person that could testify to the alleged conspiracy, having been the only one to speak with Tryon. A lot of CCTV footage was shown to the court. One clip showed Tongo and Shriel talking in the hotel lobby just a day after Annie was killed. One of the cleaners could be seen in the frame as well. Shreem talks to the cleaner for a second, and Tongo said that this conversation was Shreem asking him to give the person privacy. After the cleaner leaves, Shreem allegedly asked Tongo if the job had been done. Tongo said he warned Sheeran that there was a camera right above them. Sheeran looks up and stares at the camera for a second before looking away. Sheehan said that this was a totally innocent conversation. More footage was played out. It showed Sheehan and Tongo meeting in the hotel again. Sheehan, who had been sat with Vinod in one of the rooms, can be seen carrying some sort of white envelope or package. Tongo follows him to another room away from Vinod and other guests and then leaves with the same package. Shreen then returns empty-handed and Tongo leaves the hotel and heads back to his car. The state said they believed this was the money that had been promised for the hit, but Sheeran's lawyers said that the money was simply for his services as a driver. Some said this made total sense. Others questioned, if this was the case, why did the exchange of money take place at a private area, off camera, and away from Annie's father? Tonga was initially very confident on the stand, but when it came time for the defense's cross-examination, his version of events started to change. His story was showing more and more contradictions. At one point, he claimed the police must have added things into his statements without him knowing, which was why he was getting confused. Tongo, Mond, and Quabe were all found to have committed perjury when their testimonies showed differing versions, and they admitted to not telling the truth in parts of their affidavits. This threw everything about the already confusing case into question once more. The defense's case was getting stronger by the day, as the state's case and their star witness began to crumble. On the 23rd day of Sheehan's trial, his lawyers requested that the judge throw out the case on the basis that they deemed it to be massively flawed. This was all before Sheeran had even taken to the stand himself. For years after the murder of Annie Dewaney, Judge Jeanette Traverso gave a statement. She came down hard on the prosecution and criticized their case against Srian. She said that the statements of the key witnesses were full of contradictions and ordered that Sri and Dewaney be found not guilty. Srian said, "It is the evidence of these proven liars that led to a witch hunt against me and the resulting failure to pursue the truth of what happened that night." Annie's family were devastated. They said they felt they had been let down by the justice system and that Annie had been let down too. After Sheehan's exoneration, Annie's family asked for the coroner's court in the UK to reopen the inquest into her death, which would compel to publicly answer questions. Coroner Andrew Walker said there was insufficient cause to start an inquest, and he was prohibited from reaching a conclusion that was inconsistent with the findings of the South African courts. A formal complaint was lodged against Judge Traverso amid allegations of bias, with many feeling that Sheehan should have been made to take the stand and give evidence. She would later be cleared of these claims. Menjini, who was still suffering from a brain tumor, eventually died in prison. Leopold Lasser, the man that had told the papers about his secret relationship with Rehan, was said to have been suffering from tremendous stress due to the court case. Sadly, in 2016, he took his own life. According to news reports, as of 2018, Sheeran was still living in the UK with his boyfriend of about 18 months at the time. In 2021, after serving half his sentence, Zola Tongo was up for parole. Annie's father and uncle went to speak with him in prison before his scheduled release. They said they showed him a picture of Annie, and he was emotionless, unaware of who it was. When they explained who she was, he started crying. Both men said that they weren't satisfied that it was genuine emotion and that he didn't feel remorseful for what he had done, only that he was a very good actor. His parole was then withdrawn a day before his release. The murder of Annie Dewaney is a polarizing case and one that continues to haunt her family. Many think that it was a completely random carjacking that either intentionally or unintentionally ended in murder. Everything that happened in between is purely coincidental, and anything seemingly pointing towards Shryan is unjust, unfair, and lacks evidence. Some think that it was planned, but by Zola Tonga, when he saw the glamorous couple with their expensive luggage and belongings, he saw an opportunity to kidnap Annie and use her as part of an extortion plan that ended up going horribly wrong. But others believe that Shri and Mastermind did the whole operation and got away with an atrocious crime. Annie's family and friends are still seeking answers, and things only get tougher for them the more that time passes. Annie's uncle said, "Still today we don't know exactly what happened. That brings a lot of uncertainty. Guessing what happened and knowing what happened are two different things. We want to know what happened." The conflicting stories and accounts from so many means the full truth of what happened that night, how it came to be, and what, if any, connection the five men had on that fateful night back in 2010 will likely never be known. When and was kidnapped. He had lived nearby the Pham family and had never been a suspect in the initial investigation. Before his arrest in 1998, he had been stationed at Fort Ord, a now closed army base. Ann's body had been found in a wooded area near that base. He is currently awaiting extradition to California. He was charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances. He faces life in prison or potentially the death penalty. Ann's family hasn't made any statements to the media, but they are said to be processing this new information as they never believed they would have answers to Ann's murder. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. 2-year-old Mary Agnes Maroney disappeared in the bustling city of Chicago on a chilly day in November 1930. Her disappearance baffled authorities for 93 years, and her family members were left devastated. This case of decades-lost child is confusing. Mary Agnes Maroney's enigmatic disappearance made international news for years. False leads and pointless discoveries failed for almost a century to locate the child and reunite her with her family. But over time, the puzzle's pieces started to line up. Mary Agnes Maroney's case remained unsolved despite numerous DNA tests, suspicious letters, sighting reports, and reported sightings until 2023, when a Californian woman came forward with the solution to the long-standing puzzle. Stay with us as we reveal the shocking details surrounding Mary's disappearance and the surprising turn of events that resulted in the resolution of her case. Mary Agnes Maroney was born to Catherine and Michael Maroney in Chicago, Illinois, on May 9, 1928. In the depths of poverty during the Great Depression, they were a family struggling to get by. Mary had a younger sister named Anastasia, who was only 11 months old at the time. Mary and her family lived in an apartment on the second floor above a supermarket at 5200 Wentworth Avenue. Michael Maroney distributed handbills to earn his meager weekly salary of only $15. The Maroneys were having a difficult time. In the midst of their financial struggles, one of Catherine Maroney's relatives became interested in the family story. This relative took the initiative to get in touch with a welfare organization, and as a result, an advertisement about their financial struggles was publicized. Shortly after, Edgar Gilpin, a self-described male nurse and philanthropist, responded to the advertisement on May 13, 1930, on a Wednesday night. He offers Michael help in the form of a suit and some shoes. Since the addresses of families in need were kept secret from the public, the family accepted the offer through the welfare organization. But due to a small error, a mysterious woman learned the Maroney family's address. They had no idea that this seemingly insignificant mistake would trigger a tragic chain of events that would alter their lives for good. On May 14, 1930, Catherine Maroney, who was 17 years old at the time, was at home by herself with Mary Agnes and Anastasia. She heard a knock at the door as she was mopping the floor. When she goes to answer the door, a nicely dressed woman who identified herself as Mrs. Henderson and claimed to be a representative of the social worker who had seen the Maroney family's advertisement for assistance, was standing at the doorstep. She had just brought inside some groceries she had bought from the downstairs grocery store for $2.55. Mary Agnes, who was typically reserved, quickly warmed up to the woman as Catherine described their family's hardship to her. The woman appeared friendly and eager to assist while listening intently. She said her aging husband had passed away, leaving her with a sizable fortune. A child like Mary Agnes was something else she mentioned wanting. She then requested that Mary Agnes be temporarily taken to California with her while assuring Catherine that the young girl would be as chubby as a butterball. Catherine struggled to overcome her unease. She politely turned down the woman's offer, and the woman seemed to have accepted the mother's decision. The woman soon left and assured Catherine she would be back the following day. Catherine asked for her name, and the woman reluctantly identified herself as Julia Otis. Julia gave Catherine $2 and 2 books before she left as a sign of support. The next day, on May 14, 1930, even though it was raining, Julia Otis went back to the Maroney's house. She brought fresh baby clothes this time for Catherine, who was at the time expecting her third child. Later, it was found that Julia had bought these clothes from a department store with a brand new $50 bill. She offered to drive Mary Agnes to a clothes-buy shop so she could buy new clothes and shoes and claimed to have found her father a better job. Catherine reluctantly agreed to let Mary Agnes go with her because she was appreciative of the woman's generosity and thought of her as a blessing. Julia Otis took little Mary away and left in spite of her sobs and tantrums. The two, however, disappeared without a trace. Catherine and Michael turned to the police for assistance as they searched desperately for their beloved daughter. They searched for traces, but none were discovered. On the same evening, an elderly man in shabby clothing who claimed to be a welfare worker showed up at the Maroney home. Catherine reported him to the police because she was uncomfortable with his presence. The men tried to stop her from making the call through to the police, but failed and eventually ran away. He was never identified or found. Julia Otis was described by Catherine as a pleasant and attractive woman, around the age of 22, standing at around 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 125 pounds. She spoke with a refined voice and had visible front teeth. Julia was dressed in a gray suit, a gray lace hat, a pearl necklace, and a jeweled wristwatch when they last saw each other. At around 8 p.m. the following day, on May 16th, a letter from Julia Otis arrived at the Maroney residence. The letter was written on letterhead, and the postmark on it showed that it was delivered at 4:30 p.m. It came with a $5 bill and was delivered via special delivery. The letter read, "Please don't be alarmed. I have taken your little girl to California with me. I have hired a special nurse to care for her. We'll be back in 2 months. By that time, you will be on your feet again and will be able to care for her. She didn't even cry a bit. She is outfitted like a princess. In the meantime, I'll help all I can to get you on your feet. Don't worry about anything else. When you get this letter, we'll be on our way already. As ever, Julia Otis." The authorities examined the letter and found that there were deliberate attempts to make the writing appear illiterate. Could the letter's author have been hiding their true educational background on purpose? As word of the letter spread, witnesses soon came forward with stories of a woman who resembled Julia's description. A young girl who resembled Mary Agnes and the woman were spotted together at a store. A witness saw the woman dictating a letter to a store employee. The Morones got a second letter from someone named Alice Henderson 2 weeks later. She claimed to be Julia Otis's cousin. Alice stated in her letter that Julia had lost both her husband and her child the year before, and so, she had been craving love since her tragic loss. Alice expressed her wish for Julia to change her mind and give Mary Agnes back. She then ceased all correspondence with the family. Authorities eventually found that both letters had identical handwriting. For days after Mary Agnes was kidnapped, on May 19th, Catherine Maroney took matters into her own hands and asked a judge for a warrant, accusing Julia Otis of abducting her first fruit. Both the public and law enforcement were puzzled by this mysterious woman's abduction of Mary Agnes Maroney. In an effort to find any indication of the two boarding a train, the police searched all of Chicago's railroad stations. However, it appeared as though the two had disappeared with no single trace. A girl fitting Mary Agnes' description was spotted in Rockford, Illinois. On July 23, 1931, a 3-year-old white girl who resembled Mary Agnes in terms of tan skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes was seen in a cart being pushed by an elderly Native American woman named Martha Thompson. When the Morones were notified and showed up to identify the girl, Martha claimed that the girl had been abandoned by her mother, whose name was Florence Fuller, and that she was on her way to join a circus with the child. The young girl, according to Catherine, was not Mary Agnes. Catherine gave the girl a thorough examination. She made sure she wasn't her daughter by inspecting her teeth and body. Both parents were inconsolable when it dawned on them that the girl wasn't Mary Agnes. One thing that set Mary Agnes apart from the girl from Rockford was the red mark on her arm. The case of Mary Agnes' disappearance eventually became cold because the investigation yielded no meaningful leads. In the coming years, the Maroney family welcomed another child whom they named Catherine into the world. They then had the good fortune to welcome 5 more boys named Michael Jr., Patrick, George, Harold, and William. When other kids went missing, the media frequently ran stories about Mary Agnes, keeping her name in the public eye. When Chicago Daily News reporter Eden Wright came across a picture of the Maroney family, he noticed something important. All of the family members looked alike, which gave him the idea for a story. In an effort to get someone to recognize Mary Agnes, the Chicago Daily News worked with the California newspaper to publish photos of the Maroney family. Soon enough, a Californian man by the name of Everett McClellan came forward in 1952. The men claimed that Anastasia, one of Mary Agnes' sisters, looked so much like his wife that it might have been her picture. The woman, Mary McClellan, was 24 years old and had been adopted in 1930 by Charles and Nora Beck. The teeth, blood type, skull type, fingerprints, and handprints of Mary McClellan appeared to be identical to those of Mary Agnes. However, Mary McClellan lacked two things Mary Agnes had. Mary Agnes was born a year later than McClellan, and McClellan did not have Mary Agnes' distinctive hernia scar from a surgical procedure. The newspaper arranged a meeting between Mary McClellan and Catherine on September 4, 1952, but much to everyone's dismay, Catherine Maroney insisted that Mary McClellan was not her lost daughter. Regardless, the women developed a close bond over time. Ultimately, a DNA test carried out in 2008 after Mary McClellan's demise established that she was not Mary Agnes. Mary Agnes' parents, Catherine and Michael, were profoundly affected by the tragic disappearance of their daughter. Michael passed away in 1957 at the age of 58, leaving behind an extraordinary amount of pain brought on by the loss of his dearly loved daughter. Depression plagued Catherine for years, as she was consumed by the pain of her daughter's disappearance. She was only 49 years old when she died in 1962, after she had endured her loss all the way to the end. For close to a century, Mary Agnes' case remained a mystery. When Cook County Sheriff's Detective, Jose Rodriguez, started looking into Mary Agnes' disappearance in 2022 and contacted Terry Arnold, the daughter of a woman he thought was the long-lost Mary Agnes Maroney, the case took a great turn. Detective Rodriguez thought Mary Agnes might actually be Terry's mother based on DNA evidence. When the detective first explained his hypothesis that Jeanette Burchard might actually be Mary Agnes Maroney to Terry Arnold, Terry was doubtful and didn't buy it. She emphasized the absence of Mary Agnes' birthmark and other distinguishing features in her mother. But Terry agreed to take a commercial DNA test in order to disprove the theory and offer concrete proof. On October 28, 2022, the test results were received, and they produced a startling finding. Her genetic makeup, in contrast to Terry's Polish heritage, predominantly revealed Irish ancestry, which was a notable similarity with the Maroney family. The DNA test also established Terry Arnold's relationship to the Maroney family's surviving members as first-line cousins. This coincidental relationship strengthened the notion that Terry's mother was Mary Agnes Maroney. Who was she, though? Her family had been informed that Jeanette Burchard was born on April 14, 1928. She was raised by Jeanette Solrick Darris Anderson and her stepfather, Frank Darris. Detective Rodriguez did not find any obvious abnormalities in Burchard's family during his investigation. However, Terry provided a crucial piece of information. Frank Darris, Terry's step-grandfather, once told Jeanette Burchard that the woman who raised her wasn't her biological mother. Terry also claimed that her mother attempted to find out more about her true ancestry by contacting her Chicago-based cousins, but they claimed to be unaware of the situation. However, it was later discovered that before getting married to Frank Darris, the woman who raised Jeanette had a brief relationship with a man by the name of John Fahey. Fahey and the woman, along with Jeanette Burchard, were listed as residing in the same Chicago home in the 1930 census. After getting married to Darris, the family moved to Virginia in the early 1930s. Later, during World War II, they moved to Florida. Jeanette Burchard wed Edward Jennings in the 1940s, and the two of them had two children named Barbara Joan Jennings and Edward Clifton Jennings Jr. After starting her career as a nurse, Jeanette gave birth to Terry Arnold, her third child, in 1957. A few decades later, she wed Earl Burchard a second time. The Miami Dolphins were Jeanette's favorite team, and she supported them from the time they were founded in 1966 throughout her entire life. Jeanette was a nurse, but she also had a great love for animals, especially dogs and cats. She also loved opera, with Madame Butterfly being a particular favorite. According to Terry, the last time her mother visited Chicago was probably between 1989 and 1995, possibly for a funeral. She later died in Florida in 2003, and her remains were buried alongside her pets. A year later, her son, Edward Clifton Jennings Jr. died. Her daughter, Barbara Joan Jennings, soon passed away in 2006 too. Terry Arnold is, however, the only surviving child of Jeanette Burchard, and she is certain that Mary Agnes Maroney is indeed her mother, whom she knows as Jeanette Burchard. In an interview, Terry admitted that she didn't know anything about the name, Julia Otis, or how her grandmother ended up raising her mother, Jeanette Burchard. Terry is still oblivious to the circumstances surrounding this mystery. However, She acknowledged that Mary Agnes' parents never received closure or knew the truth about what really happened to their daughter and expressed sympathy and sadness for them. Terry assured the Maroney family that Jeanette Burchard, or Mary Agnes as Terry knew her, was dearly loved despite the unanswered questions. Mary Agnes Maroney was the subject of a decades-long, relentless search in 1930. The horrific chapter that has plagued the Maroney family's generations for almost a century has finally come to an end as of this year 2023. But there was still one unanswered question. Who was Julia Otis, and what motivated her to kidnap young Mary Agnes from her loving family? We will never be able to know some of these responses. The case of Carrie Leah Farver. Carrie Leah Farver was born on November 30th, 1974, in Macedonia, Nebraska, USA. As a single mother, she raised her son, Max Maxwell, after experiencing failed relationships in the past. Raising Max was challenging for Carrie. Despite her immense love for her child, she struggled with depression, which led to a period where she spent a month in bed. During this time, her mother, Nancy Rainey, took care of Max. Carrie's difficult relationship with Max's father and unstable living conditions contributed to her mental health issues. At the age of 20, Carrie's struggles led to a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. This condition causes extreme mood swings ranging from euphoria, increased productivity, and excessive friendliness to depression, bitterness, and feelings of powerlessness. Although bipolar disorder significantly complicates daily life, Carrie's doctor found an effective treatment for her in the early 2000s. With this treatment, Carrie was able to manage her condition and live a relatively normal life. Whether Carrie wanted to settle her personal life is an open question. On one hand, what woman doesn't dream of a suitable partner? On the other hand, why commit to someone who might bring worries and misfortunes? Carrie was raised in a loving family and had an active lifestyle. She played sports and aspired to become a doctor. However, her dreams were cut short during her first medical practice when she fainted at the sight of blood. Deciding not to risk her health or her patients, she pursued a career in programming instead. In the fall of 2012, Carrie received a job offer in Omaha with good prospects and decided to take it. However, her son Max was in middle school and preferred to stay in his familiar surroundings, so he remained with his grandmother in Macedonia. According to Amy, a friend of Carrie's father, Carrie had a radiant smile that drew attention whenever she entered a room. It was likely this quality that caught Dave Kropa's eye when they met at an auto repair shop in November 2012. As Carrie showed him something inside her car, a Ford Explorer, Dave felt an instant attraction. Their first date arrived soon after, but their time together was interrupted by numerous calls and messages from a woman named Liz, who eventually stopped by Dave's apartment to collect something she had left there earlier. Dave told Carrie about his past relationship with Liz, whom he met on a dating site 6 months prior. They had been together for a while, but he ended things because she was extremely clingy. Carrie was understanding and wasn't fazed by Liz's presence in Dave's apartment, recognizing that everyone has past relationships that can resurface. 2 weeks after moving in, Carrie started dating Dave. They had discussed their expectations beforehand and agreed to a brief, casual affair. Liz, whose full name is Shauna Elizabeth Gollier, was the first person Dave met online in 2012. Dave and Liz had children around the same age. However, Dave felt Liz wasn't a suitable long-term partner due to her limited education and lack of shared interests. Their relationship focused more on physical intimacy than meaningful conversations. Over time, Liz grew increasingly interested in what Dave was doing when she wasn't around, particularly in regards to who he was seeing. However, Dave consistently reminded her that they were in an open relationship, implying that she shouldn't be concerned about his interactions with others. He also reassured her that she had the freedom to date other men if she chose to do so. Despite Dave's openness, Liz couldn't shake off her feelings of dissatisfaction and jealousy, particularly towards Dave's children and their mother, Amy. She struggled to understand the close bond that persisted between Dave and Amy even after their breakup. As a result, Liz's behavior became increasingly possessive, prompting Dave to create distance between them. It was during this period of separation that Carrie entered Dave's life. Carrie was not only beautiful, but also stylish, intelligent, and a great conversationalist. Dave found himself lost in conversation with her for hours, feeling an undeniable connection as they shared common interests and perspectives. Liz noticed that Dave was becoming increasingly distant, so she tried to rekindle their connection by sending messages, emails, and making phone calls. However, He had no intention of stopping his interactions with Carrie or anyone else for her sake. Meanwhile, Carrie and Dave were spending more nights together, which was convenient for Carrie's work schedule and enjoyable for Dave. Carrie seemed to be taking things lightly, focusing on having fun and not looking for anything serious. In December 2015, Liz was shot and non-fatally wounded, leading her to suspect who might be responsible and realize she needed to take action. 2 years prior, on November 13, 2012, Carrie had kissed Dave goodbye before he left for work, expecting to see him later. However, that would be the last time they saw each other. At 9:45 a.m. that morning, Dave received a surprising text message from Carrie stating she wanted to move in with him permanently. Dave found this message disconcerting as they had previously discussed and agreed not to rush into a relationship, being happy with their current situation. Dave replied that he wasn't ready for such a change, but Carrie's response was unpleasant and filled with profanity. He was shocked to discover that all of Carrie's belongings were gone from the apartment. This led him to believe she had left him for good. That same day, Carrie also removed him as a friend on Facebook, which seemed like the end of the matter. However, Dave started getting multiple rude texts and emails from Carrie daily, containing curses and threats to ruin his life. Carrie sent a large number of these messages, all of which were aggressive. Uncharacteristically, she also stopped showing up for work, despite being known for her punctuality. Strange messages weren't only sent to Dave, but also to her mother and 15-year-old son, Max. She claimed to have found a job in Kansas and planned to take Max with her, but wanted to be alone for the time being due to worries over her failed romance. In May 2013, Carrie posted on Facebook that she'd left of her own free will and was tired of criticism. She wasn't missing her old life but wasn't ready to return home. Carrie asserted her independence as a grown woman, stating that she had the right to leave home if she chose to. She apologized for hurting everyone by leaving abruptly. However, as time passed, Carrie failed to reappear. Her mother became increasingly concerned when Carrie missed important family events, including her own birthday, Max's birthday, and other celebrations. The final indication that something was seriously wrong was when Carrie missed her father's funeral. Liz began receiving messages from Carrie, which were insulting, humiliating, and even threatening. Carrie warned Liz to stay away from Dave. Confused by Carrie's behavior, Liz reached out to Dave, who revealed he was facing a similar situation. Carrie was sending him messages and emails, accusing him of wrongdoing, calling him a liar, and vowing revenge for the pain he allegedly caused her. The messages were sometimes ominous, with Carrie claiming to know what Dave was doing at the moment. The shared experience brought Dave and Liz closer together, but also made Dave feel guiltier about the trouble he had caused. The messages from Carrie grew more menacing and were filled with grammatical errors and illogical content. This was unusual, as Carrie's mother claimed that her daughter had always been a calm person who wrote coherent and well-structured letters and documents. Carrie was known to be meticulous about spelling and writing style. It's possible that she had experienced even more severe mental health issues. Her actions seemed to be driven solely by her uncontrolled mental state. A key indicator of dissociative identity disorder, also known as split personality, is the presence of separate simultaneous self-consciousness in each ego, each with its own distinct memories, thoughts, behaviors, and inclinations towards specific actions. This might explain Carrie's unusual behavior and altered writing style. Everything suggested she was unstable, which is why the police didn't initially consider her missing, instead focusing on stopping the pursuit of Liz and Dave. They tried to track Carrie's cell phone, but it was unsuccessful due to blocked signals. Meanwhile, Liz and Dave continued to receive hundreds of texts and emails, sometimes simultaneously receiving nasty messages when they were together. Dave and Liz continued dating, but he felt uneasy around her as she became increasingly demanding. Despite claiming to be fine with their no-commitment relationship, Liz's behavior suggested otherwise. Every time Dave tried to end things with Liz, Carrie would start texting him, bonding with him over their shared victimization. This common ground drew Dave and Carrie closer together, causing them to reunite repeatedly. In January 2013, a missing car was surprisingly found in Dave's front yard. However, the fingerprints on the steering wheel didn't match Carrie's, and the car showed no suspicious signs. The police eventually returned the car to Carrie's parents. Carrie continued to message Liz and Dave, escalating her behavior by sending pictures of their children and threatening to harm them unless Dave left Liz alone. As time passed, Carrie's stalking persisted, and Liz's jealousy grew, frustrating Dave. He became exhausted with the events unfolding in his life and eventually found the strength to end his relationship with Liz. This decision came shortly after a tragic incident in August 2013 when Liz reported a fire at her home that resulted in the death of all her pets, including a snake, a cat, and 2 dogs. Liz suspected Carrie was responsible, citing repeated threats made via texts and emails. The incident marked a significant turning point in the case of missing person Carrie Farver, leading to Carrie's placement on a federal wanted list. Tens of thousands of messages were meticulously analyzed. Law enforcement seized cell phones from Dave and Liz, as they believed Dave was also in danger. Someone had vandalized the auto repair shop where he worked and thrown a brick through his window. It appeared that Carrie's anger was directed at anyone in Dave's life. Consequently, Amy Flora, Dave's ex-wife, began receiving threatening messages from Carrie. As Dave spent time with his children, he also saw Amy regularly. The police were perplexed as to why Carrie, who had dated Dave for less than 2 weeks, was now stalking Dave and his ex-wife. The investigators decided to focus on Dave Kropa, as Carrie's disappearance raised many questions that needed to be answered. It was a mystery that didn't add up. Carrie Farver's family was also tirelessly searching for her, exploring every possible lead to find her. Their efforts finally paid off in the spring of 2015 when detectives Ryan Avis and Jim Doty took on the case. Unfortunately, they found no evidence that Carrie was still alive. One of the detectives shared their thoughts with ABC News. "It's unusual for adults to suddenly leave without using any money. No one saw or heard from her, which doesn't make sense. She had a good income and a nice home. I've come to believe that I have no proof she's alive." With the help of a digital forensics expert, the detectives analyzed data from Kropa and Golyer's phones from 2013. They discovered that Carrie had sent over 50,000 texts and 15,000 emails to Dave in just 3 years. Whoever was impersonating Carrie became increasingly sophisticated, trying to hide their IP address and true identity. Somebody with expertise in computer programs seemed to be behind the strange occurrences. In December 2015, Liz Golyer contacted the police again, this time reporting that she had been shot in the leg on her own doorstep. She claimed her attacker was Amy Flora, not Carrie. Coincidentally, Dave was missing a gun that Amy may have had access to. This new development raised suspicions that Amy might be involved in Carrie's disappearance. The investigation uncovered a lead that suggested Amy's motive. She may have been seeking revenge against women connected to Dave Kropa. Amy's relationship with Dave had been complicated, and the presence of other women in his life might have prevented them from reuniting. The police promptly questioned Amy, but surprisingly, she had a solid alibi. Multiple witnesses confirmed that she was not at Liz's house when the shooting occurred, so no arrest was made. The investigation became increasingly puzzling. New details emerged from the analysis of Liz's cell phone data. Investigators found fake email addresses using variations of Farver's name and an app used to schedule messages. This discovery shed light on how Liz and Dave received simultaneous messages from Carrie. The investigation led to suspicion of Liz Golyer, which intensified when her fingerprint matched those on Carrie's car steering wheel. It was now clear who the culprit was, and the priority was to prevent further harm. To catch Liz off guard, detectives devised a plan to create a fake narrative, pretending to still consider Amy the prime suspect, aiming to prevent Liz from escaping or destroying evidence. Liz fell for the trap. She was thrilled at the opportunity to eliminate another rival who was threatening her relationship with Dave. Soon after, Liz Golyer gave the police an email supposedly written by Amy. The email included a confession to kidnapping Carrie, along with specific details about the crime. According to the confession, Carrie had been stabbed in the stomach or chest area before her body was disposed of. The email also revealed information about Carrie's car and home that had not been publicly disclosed. According to an investigative spokeswoman, Liz provided detectives with information that only someone intimately involved in the crime could have known. In doing so, she inadvertently implicated herself in Carrie Farver's murder. The letter made it clear that the crime occurred in a car, prompting authorities to re-examine the victim's vehicle. Upon removing the seat covers and fabric, specialists discovered a bloodstain belonging to Carrie Farver. Liz managed to send messages posing as Carrie without arousing suspicion, but it's unclear how. Reports suggest that Liz Golyer led a double life, dating both Dave and a man named Garrett. Notably, Garrett's IP address was linked to messages sent under Carrie's name. When questioned, Garrett revealed that he had been in a long-term relationship with Liz. Out of kindness, Garrett invited Liz to move in with him and his children after a fire. However, their relationship became complicated and deteriorated significantly once they started living together. Garrett would often take care of Liz's children while she isolated herself in her room or left the house. Garrett was shocked by what the police told him. It was discovered that Liz spent 40 to 50 hours a week pretending to be a missing woman. Although her room was messy, no significant evidence was found. However, investigators did discover several cell phones and electronic devices in the last place she stayed. In late December 2016, Shauna Liz was charged with first-degree murder. The county prosecutor commented on the complexity of the investigation, stating that most murders are dark, but this crime was particularly bizarre. It would take some convincing to make someone believe it actually happened. Liz's actions, including letting her dog die in a fire she set herself and shooting herself in the thigh, were attempts to deflect suspicion from herself. Liz's attorney, James Martin Davis, believed the case against her was weak, since it was largely based on circumstantial evidence. Key pieces of evidence were missing, including Carrie's body and the crime weapon, and Liz had not confessed to the crime. In fact, there was no conclusive proof that Carrie was even dead. The defense team requested a mistrial, which would allow a judge to determine the extent of Shauna's guilt. The prosecution presented a substantial amount of complex electronic evidence, as well as physical evidence. They argued that the amount of blood found on the passenger seat of Carrie's car supported the theory that she had been stabbed. Investigators also found a direct link between Shauna and Carrie's murder by analyzing a memory card that Shauna had used around the time Carrie went missing. The memory card, which was found in a tablet stored at Dave's residence, contained deleted images. It was clear that the foot belonged to a person who had been deceased for several years. Notably, Carrie had a similar tattoo among her distinguishing features. Her mother later confirmed that the tattoo indeed belonged to Carrie. The photo solidified the conviction of Shauna Liz as a predator. The judge ruled her guilty of first-degree murder and handed down a life sentence without parole, stating that Carrie Farver did not disappear by choice but was tragically murdered. Authorities suspect that Shauna murdered Carrie, allowed her body to decompose, and then burned the remains to eliminate all evidence. Motivated by jealousy, she decided to eliminate her rival. After disposing of Carrie, Shauna took her cell phone and used it to send messages that would make Farver appear unstable and win back Dave's favor. When this plan succeeded, Shauna wanted to eliminate Amy as well, but she became too entangled in her own scheme and ultimately fell into her own trap. Shauna, also known as Liz, was also found guilty of arson for setting fire to her own home in August 2013 and attempting to blame it on Carrie. The fire destroyed the house and killed pets, resulting in an additional 20-year prison sentence. She is currently serving her sentence at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women, despite maintaining her innocence. Dave revealed that he received thousands of emails and text messages signed by Carrie over the years. However, he claimed that he never noticed Carrie stalking him during their relationship, which contrasts with his experience with Shauna. So what happened to Carrie's son, Maxwell Farver? According to his LinkedIn profile, he followed in his mother's footsteps and became a computer programmer. He graduated from the University of Iowa with a degree in software engineering data science and is now married. Although it's unlikely he's forgotten the past, he may have found some peace with his new family. As for Dave Kropa, he now lives a private life away from the public eye. He doesn't have a public account on any social media platform. This disturbing crime story is a harsh reminder of the complexities and manipulation that can occur in human relationships. It highlights how vulnerable we can be in our own surroundings, unaware of the true nature of those around us.